Hello, and welcome to this online Sultan Light and Latino Leader Gathering on Young and Latino Leaders on Immigration, Continuing Challenges, New Urgency, Time for Action. My name is Anna Misla, and I'm the project manager for the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. Our initiative is pleased to be co-sponsoring this gathering with several offices at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development, the Secretariat of Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth, the Department of Migration and Refugee Services, the Secretariat of Cultural Diversity in the Church, and the National Advisory Team on Young Adult Ministry. We're delighted to be collaborating with these key parts of the Bishops' Conference. And it's an honor for me to be moderating today's discussion among our four outstanding leaders. Some have already sent in questions for the panelists, and we invite you to do so as well by sending them to the email you see on the bottom of your screen. Please also share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag Young Leaders Immigration and by tagging GUCST Public Life and USCCB on Twitter. Our conversation today is a follow-up to a dialogue our initiative held on April 15th, just a few weeks ago, on immigration challenges and choices, people, principles, and policies. We brought together leaders from the border, on policy, in the Catholic Church, and from the immigrant community to discuss the human, moral, social, and economic costs of our broken immigration system. Today's gathering is a continuation of that conversation, with a focus on what young people can do to help break through the anger, hurt, and division over immigration in our nation. The U.S. Catholic Church and national leaders should listen to millennials and those who are a part of Generation Z, especially young Latinos. More than 1 in 5 millennials self-identify as Catholic. 54% of Catholics under the age of 40 are Hispanic, and 60% of Catholics under the age of 18 are Hispanic. As you'll hear from our panelists tonight, there's a vibrant, diverse, and engaged young adult community in the U.S. Catholic Church. A recently released report from Springtide Research Institute on supporting Gen Z after the COVID-19 pandemic offers some key takeaways. We need to listen, exercise empathy, and hold intentional gatherings to build community and resist isolation for young people. That's what we hope tonight's conversation will be about: listening, learning, empathy, solidarity, and community, less isolation, and more action. Today, we'll hear from 4 leaders who bring experience, expertise, and passion to the Sultan Light and Latino Leader Gathering. Ana Chavarin is a leader with Pima County Interfaith, a young immigrant mother, and winner of the 2019 Cardinal Bernardin New Leadership Award from the USCCB's Catholic Campaign for Human Development. Dylan Corbett is the founding director of Hope Border Institute. He is a former staffer with the Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and with the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. Jessica Hernandez is the coordinator for Hispanic Youth and Young Adult Ministry for the Diocese of Des Moines, Iowa, a DACA recipient, and she's currently studying for her MA in Theology and Pastoral Ministry at Boston College. And finally, Sister Norma Pimentel is the executive director of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley, a longtime advocate for immigrants and refugees, and the recipient of the University of Notre Dame's 2018 Laetare Medal. I'm going to ask the entire panel a brief opening question, and then I'll come back to each of them with more specific questions based on their experience. If time permits, we'll have some discussion among the panelists, and then I'll ask them to respond to questions from you, our audience. And with that, let's get the conversation started. Yesterday, after some pressure from the Catholic community and others, President Biden announced that his administration would revise the United States annual refugee admissions cap to 62,500 for this fiscal year, with the goal of reaching 125,000 refugee admissions for the next fiscal year. This is a promising action, first and foremost, for refugees who are seeking safety in the U.S. It's also a hopeful sign for this administration's possible action on other policies that impact immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. So let me ask each of you, what is the most important or underappreciated factor in the current situation regarding immigrants, refugees, and/or asylum seekers for policies in the U.S. right now? What's being missed? Sister Norma, let's start with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My experience has been directly involved with the families at the border. I see the families almost every day. I walked across the river, across the bridge and visit with the families. I'm there with them. I believe the most important factor is the people. Overlooking people, families, children in policies is critical. I think because what we do or fail to do directly affects a life. And so therefore, policy should not contribute to human suffering. So we must definitely examine and question any policy that contributes to human suffering.
That's perfect. We need to focus on the human face of immigration. That's a great place to start. Dylan, let's turn to you. What's the most important or underappreciated factor regarding U.S. immigration policy?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Thanks to the initiative for putting this together in the USCCB, and it's wonderful to be with all these great panelists. I really feel honored. I would say, I like Sister Norma, I'm here on the U.S.-Mexico border and working with directly impacted people, migrants and refugees who are coming to our border. And I'd say, I'm going to sidestep the policy for a second, and I would say that the biggest thing that I would want people to know is that immigrants and immigration are not something to be feared. I think that's important for people to know. I'm in a community right now, El Paso, which is right on the border, and I'm looking out my window right now. I can literally see, about a quarter of a mile away, our sister city, Ciudad Juarez, and we're a vibrant binational community. Add us all up, we're about 3 million people. We depend on each other, people crossing the bridge all the time, students and family. It's vibrant, it's economically vibrant. We're a motor for the national economy, the international economy. We are, culturally vibrant, religiously vibrant. A quarter of our population here in El Paso is foreign born, more than 80% Latino, Latina. And we're one of the safest communities in the United States. And all that vibrancy, it's not in spite of migration, it's not in spite of immigrants, but it's in large part because of immigrants and migration. This is a community which has immigration in its DNA, and it's beautiful because of it. It's a community which knows hospitality, which has provided hospitality for years, decades, if not centuries for migrants. And we look in large part like the rest of America. A lot of communities in America are like us in that, they'll have a significant portion of their community that's foreign born. So we shouldn't be afraid of immigration. Immigration is not a threat. And as a border community, I would say I would go further and say something like, the border is not a problem. It's not a problem to be fixed. We're talking about relationships that need to be healed. And I think that that's true about immigration. Immigration is not a problem to be fixed. It's not just a policy problem. It's about healing relationships.
That's powerful. Immigrants are not something to be feared. Immigration is not something to be feared. Anna, what are your thoughts on this question?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I agree with what has been said so far. And one thing that I would like to pick up is remember that immigrants and refugees are children of God, and they are escaping horrible situations, violence, lack of resources, and instability, and they are facing so much. And when they come to our borders, they come to seek for help, for refuge, and we have the moral obligation to help them and to open our arms and receive them and help them. And I think sometimes that fear that we're talking about makes us forget who they are and how they are part of our communities and they are part of our churches. And we really need to open our doors and help them when they are in need.
Absolutely. These are children of God just the same way you and I are. Jessica, let's finish up this first question with you. What do you think? What's the most important factor right now on policies that impact immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers?
Yeah, the thing that I think is overlooked the most right now is the human dignity of the person. I think Sister Norma, Anna, and Dylan all summarizing, what part of what they said is that the human dignity of the person also brings a person's heritage, a person's gifts, a person's family. We think about the face of the person, but we also sometimes, I think, forget and overlook that person also comes with roots, heritage, and family behind them. So it's very difficult to just sometimes look at the person in front of you and not think beyond what is behind the person that you're just looking at in front of you. So, and that encompasses the dignity of the person as a whole.
Absolutely. Human dignity has such depth and many dimensions to it. And that's so important to remember, especially when sometimes media can just give us the headline and not go deeper than that. Now, I'd like to turn back to you, Sister Norma. For many watching this online gathering, your work serving migrants at the border is widely known and applauded from those on all sides of this issue. And even Pope Francis has raised up your work. Every day you accompany those who've migrated to the US-Mexico border, those on the margins, those who are left behind or forgotten by our society. First, let me just ask you, tell us about the people you're with every day at the border.
Thank you. Yes, I do find that fact that I'm able to be at the border and visit with the families. And just for the past 2 years, I was able to accompany the families that were at the refugee camp in Matamoros. Almost every day I was there with the families and see how much they struggle. These are families, niños y mamás, simple, just like you and me and our friends and our neighbors. They're people and they're hurting. They're at the other side of the river in the Mexican side. Some of them are able to make it now to the U.S. side, and you see in their faces this profound pain that they've been through, and we have been able to be there by their side, accompany them, and really help them in through what they find themselves in, cry with them, laugh with them. And just the times that I was able to celebrate with life with them at the other side at the camp was amazing, and to finally get the opportunity to cross into the United States. Like now, some of them have been given that opportunity through that MPP lift, and now have that chance, and to be able to be in the Mexican side and to see them and be rejoiced with the fact that now they get a chance to cross. It has been a very powerful experience for me to be there and to see the faces and the lives of these families that have been through this for so long, 2 years, just waiting in these terrible conditions in Mexico. And you just, don't realize how much they suffered, how much they have to endure and fear. And then all of a sudden, this country says, you can come in, and it was powerful. It was amazing to see that change, and I have to share the story of this little girl. She, a couple of months right before that this happened, she even told her mother, "Mami, ya no vamos a sufrir." And she must have been not older than 6 years old. And she tells her mother this, "Mom, we're not going to suffer anymore. God told me that on March 1st, we're going to cross into the United States. Vamos a cruzar el día 1 de marzo. Well, believe me, you or not, the day the family actually crossed was March 1st. Without this, she ever knowing the fact that this was going to happen, this was a message that she got from God. For me, it's very clear that this is God's plan. We are just God's instruments in saving his people, in being with his people, accompanying them, because they're hurting, they're suffering. And God wants to liberate his people from suffering, and it's a beautiful example of triumph to humanity. And I just hope we can continue to make this happen to the many families still at the border suffering and being turned back because of Title 42, and about the fact that they can no longer or not yet enter the United States. So being at the border really helps us understand humanity and the importance of saving humanity from suffering.
Beautifully said. And the work you're doing down at the border is just so important. Let me ask you a follow-up question. You talked about how policy has changed under the Biden administration. So I'm curious, what would you say to President Biden and members of Congress right now, and to the rest of us, about what you see every day on the border and in your work? What would you tell them?
Sometimes I always say the best way to understand what is happening at the border is to come and see. Words cannot put into and really bring out how it is when you actually see a face of a child, a mother hurting and suffering for their babies, And so not until you can actually experience the pain and the suffering of this person that is before you, can you then understand that your policies and your leadership will affect directly that life, And that's a big responsibility they have in their shoulders. So I would say to President Biden, please come and see so that you can experience what I see on a daily basis, and I can experience this pain these families are experiencing. I think that's what our leaders need. They need to come and see with an open heart what is happening at the border.
That's exactly right. Seeing the human face, seeing the human dignity, like we've said in our opening comments. That's very powerful. Dylan, let me turn to you. Like I said in the opening, you've worked for years as a staffer for the U.S. bishops on issues of justice, peace, and human development, and especially on migration issues. You now work on the U.S.-Mexico border, and you see the everyday realities of our broken immigration system. So what's old and what's new with the Biden administration's immigration policies? And just help give us a lay of the land of where we are right now.
Sure. It's a fluid situation. Things are constantly changing. The border's a fluid situation. The people who come to the border, the reasons they come, the numbers, the people, it's all very fluid. So it's something that changes. But I think that there have been some real positive and significant changes under the new government, under the Biden administration. You saw, for example, in the lifting of the refugee cap, a real strong commitment to building or rebuilding our capacity to resettle refugees around the world. So people who are fleeing violence and persecution, the United States has long been a leader in the global system of asylum. So that's a really strong signal. Here at the border, the president has made some similar decisions. For example, to end what was known as the Remain in Mexico policy. So under the previous administration, we sent about 65,000 folks back to Mexico, to communities like Ciudad Juarez across from El Paso, where they had to navigate a really difficult, a really broken immigration system from the lack of safety in Mexico, rather than doing it from the safety and security of the United States. So the president has reversed that policy, and we're beginning to do good by the people that were forcibly returned to Mexico under that policy by allowing them to make their asylum claims from the safety of the United States. A real important bill, in the first days of his administration, sent a real ambitious bill to Congress that would provide a pathway to legalization for a lot of people. And it's also an important bill from the perspective of border communities, because it doesn't have any of the traditional so-called border enforcement. A lot of times our immigration debate gets hijacked by debates about the border. And so there's none of that in the bill. So a really aspirational bill. And then the most important thing that I think the president has done is change the tone. We've been talking about immigrants as in really bad ways for the last 4 years, as people that we ought to fear. We've been vilifying and criminalizing and demonizing our migrant brothers and sisters for too long. And so the president has changed the tone around immigration and recognized that that this is an opportunity for compassion and to treat people with dignity. So all important things. Some challenging things remain at the border in particular, even though we are slowly opening up the border, for example, to those people who were sent back under Remain in Mexico. Right now, for the majority of people who come to the border, including families, the border is still sealed. The border is not a place where you can come in and seek asylum. And you should be able to do that under international law, under our federal laws. Folks have the right to come to the border to seek asylum. But that's still not the case. And there can be tragic consequences. Just the other day, I met a woman who had crossed the border 8 times. And she was allowed in on the 8th time, just kind of the luck of the draw. And when I met her, I had this face mask on, which has Our Lady of Guadalupe on it. And she told me that the first time that she had crossed in those 8 times was on Our Lady of Guadalupe. That's why she wanted to talk to me. She felt moved to talk to me. But when she tried to cross, when she was in the river, some soldiers took her back to Mexico. But her children made it to the other side. So she had 4 children, all under 12. And she had come over because she's from Honduras, and Honduras was really hit hard last year by the hurricanes. Lost her whole community, lost her family, had nothing to fall back on. So she came to the border seeking safety here, but she wasn't able to cross. And so it's been January, February, March, April, more than 4 months that she hasn't seen her children. And thank God she's been able to see her children in the last week, I think. But I can't imagine what as a dad, I have 2 children, what I would have been, like in those 4 or 5 months without a child. But that's the life and death drama. Those, tough decisions, the human impacts of a real broken system that continues to happen every day on the border, which is why we really need to fix the system.
Thanks for that very helpful overview of where we are right now. Let me ask you a specific question, Dylan. What's driving the high number of migrants at the border in these last months? Is it caused by the Biden administration's approach and language? Is it the end of the Trump administration? Is it something else?
Sure, it's a little complex. On the one hand, you do have high numbers of folks who are coming to the border. So if you look at the official government statistics, you're going to see some pretty high numbers. You got to drill down a little bit, though, and realize that a lot of those people are crossing multiple times because we still have sealed the border. Like I said, most people cannot come and seek asylum at the border under a policy called Title 42. It's a complicated name, but basically you don't have the right to come to the border right now because it's still closed. So people are trying multiple times. And in those official numbers, the official numbers don't really get to that level of nuance. And so some people are crossing 2, 3, 4, like that woman, 8 times. So that number is actually a lot lower. It's very inflated. But there are some reasons that are driving people up north to the border right now. The hurricanes, the 2 hurricanes that hit Central America at the end of last year were really devastating to a lot of communities, particularly Honduras and also Guatemala. You're seeing other climate events. Climate change is really an increasing factor in the Americas for migration. So there's something called the dry corridor, which is affecting Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, where people just can't grow. So there's food insecurity, nutrition. Nutrition insecurity is on the rise in Guatemala. Poverty is on the rise in Guatemala. And then the pandemic, just like the pandemic hit us, these countries are even less resilient and able to bounce back from the economic shocks of the pandemic. So it's sort of that toxic cocktail combined with a lot of other things, political insecurity, violence. Central America is unfortunately one of the most dangerous places in the world for women right now. There's endemic violence against women. So it's a bunch of things that are driving people up that have been around for a long time, new things like climate change, and then some of the things that we're doing as a US government, like Title 42, which are incentivizing greater numbers of people to come.
Yeah, like so many things, this immigration situation is complex and there's so many factors that coming together have just made for a very tough situation at the border. Anna, let me turn to you now. You're a Catholic, an immigrant, a mother, and an organizer. You build and strengthen community through your work with Pima County Interfaith in Tucson, Arizona. And most recently, you helped vulnerable members of your community get their COVID vaccines and have supported immigrants who have been uniquely impacted by this COVID-19 pandemic. Just start off by telling us what you're seeing and hearing from your community and how you've been responding.
Yes, we have been hearing stories about immigrant communities struggling with housing. During the pandemic, they lost their jobs or the hours were reduced, and they are in a very high risk of losing their homes and then the safety for their children. Also, we have seen the community food banks and churches who provide food increasing their lines every day. More families are joining to get a food box and to get help. So those are the stories that we are hearing. The way that we are responding to it is organizing in our parishes, developing leaders who can be organized and create teams in their parishes to have conversations with these families, to understand what they're going through, to listen to their stories, and to see what can be done and how can we help these families and advocate for them. And one of the stories also that we heard was about the vaccines. At the beginning, the vaccination pods were 20 miles away from the low income community. So when we think about the distance in families who doesn't own a car, and it would take them 3 different buses to make it to that point to get vaccinated, and we're talking about 6 hours trip to go and get a vaccine back and forth. So we organized to bring the vaccines to the churches, to the center, to the heart of the neighborhoods, when the people trust and they can come and feel safe to take the vaccines. So those are some examples of how we are responding. But now more than ever, organizing is crucial for our families to advocate and to give voice to all these families who are really struggling.
That's fantastic work. And I think developing leaders is one of the most important things you're doing. And that's why we're having this conversation today. Anna, if you could tell us a story of a young person you've worked with who has been affected by our failing immigration system.
I can tell you 20 stories, but we don't have much time for that. But yes, we have stories about young adults who are going to school and trying to get ahead in life. But then the pandemic came and they lost their jobs. And now they are in between of losing everything, losing their homes, losing their education, because as they are concerned about their safety and their food and their essential needs, they cannot focus on finishing their education. So they are in this risk of losing everything, their education, their home, their food, their plans for the future. And we've seen that this system of that is broken is providing help for some families, but our immigrant people are not getting that help. They are the last in the line and nothing is coming to them. So we really need to advocate for policies that include immigrants. So these young adults who are struggling, trying to go to school and at risk of losing everything, they can get the help so they can get ahead. They are many of these young adults are the hopes of their family. The hope of these young adults getting education so can have a better income and help their own families. And they have all the hopes and the responsibilities to get their families out of poverty. But if we don't include them in these policies, these families are going to remain in poverty and they're going to remain in the margins and last in line. So we really need to advocate for policies that include immigrants and refugees.
Absolutely. And we can't forget those families who may not be part of all of the responses we've had to the pandemic so far. And that's a great transition to turn to you, Jessica, and all of your work working with young Hispanic leaders. I think we often think about immigration as a border issue. We heard from Dylan and Sister Norma who are down at the border. But you know that it's much more than that. You work with young adults and young Latinos, especially in the Diocese of Des Moines, Iowa, supporting them in their faith and helping build community among young adults. How are your local church, community, and the state of Iowa experiencing these immigration realities, and how are you responding?
Yeah, I think people often, Anna just said it right now. For example, the youth and young adults, Hispanic youth and young adults that have parents that immigrated here, I include myself in that. There's a certain responsibility that comes with that, where we see that we need to provide for our parents and our families. And the mental stress that sometimes that can have on these youth and these young adults is a big one. We see a lot of mental health issues over here, where we look to our church communities to alleviate that by community building and faith sharing, but sometimes creating those spaces where the youth feel that they can be open and express about themselves in their immigrant reality. It's very difficult to build those when at times there are other forces going against that, such as certain discrimination or racism. So, it isn't always rural Iowa. It's really, I know everywhere that is included, but the fact that we are living over here where, jobs are here, we're developing still, but the mental stress that I see in these youth dealing with school for jobs, sometimes 2 to 3 jobs, and on top of that, having to take care of family. And then the mental stress that they also go through with knowing that at any point their parents could also be deported and there could be that separation of family is a big one. So we definitely always advocate for mental health, workshops even, but because culturally for Hispanics, mental health is not a thing. It's definitely something that we still need to be educated on. So educating the parents that sometimes that is something that we need to address and be a part of is a big issue.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful to hear your perspective coming from a different state, and especially thinking about the reality of mental health. I think that's something that we don't talk about enough, both in the church, but also when we're talking about supporting immigrants. I'm going to ask you now a little bit more of a personal question. We said at the beginning, you're a dreamer and you're a DACA recipient. Would you be willing to share with us the story of how you first came to the U.S. and what your immigrant journey has been like?
Yeah. So I came here when I was 7 years old, and I came here over with my mom and my grandma. My mom, she worked at a bank in Mexico, and, high crime rate in Mexico City, right in the smack middle of the capital. She was held at gunpoint 3 times. And by the 3rd time that happened, she realized I have a child at home that I need to take care of. And that's it for me. So the stress that came with that, and on top of that, there isn't very many job opportunities over there, and dealing with that plus the stress of just always needing to be safe and making sure that you weren't going to, the thought of not even arriving at home sometimes because you were going to get mugged or shot or something, was difficult. So that was definitely what drove my mom's decision to come over here, knowing that over here it was a safe place to start a new life with job opportunities that, no matter what they were, there was still a job, and education for myself was definitely a big part of that. Definitely the help that we received right after we got here was of a religious community of sisters, and they actually have single mom and single parents program, which my mom, they met, and they were the ones and have still been the ones that have advocated for us and have helped us in many ways since arriving here.
Thank you for sharing your story. I think that's going to be very important and powerful for people to hear. We're getting so many questions coming through, and I encourage everyone watching to continue sending your questions in. We've been collecting them, and we'll get to them soon. But I want to just go back and see if anyone wants to respond to a few more questions. We've been hearing about the importance of young voices and having new voices in this immigration conversation, especially when it seems like we're so stuck as a nation. So anyone who wants to chime in on this, how can the voices, priorities, and urgency of young and Latino leaders make a difference on immigration? And think about what difference they can make in the Catholic Church, in society, and what should we be doing and saying to Catholic and national leaders? Anyone want to respond to that? Anna, you want to go ahead?
Yes, I believe that our parishes should be creating that environment to give that opportunity to the young voices to express how they feel about immigration. And one of the things that we can do as a community and as lay leaders in our churches is providing that space, arranging those safe spaces so these youth can really participate and be active in the issues that are affecting their lives, in this case, immigrations and their families. So I think that will be the first step, providing that space so they can speak up, and we can do that in our parishes.
I want to just add what Anna just said. I agree totally, but I also would encourage young leaders, young voices to speak up on their own. Don't wait for to be invited, and don't wait for that space to be created for you. You have to believe in yourself. You have to be that voice because you're needed. You have to be that presence that speaks up. I have so many young kids that come to our respite center and volunteer, and they take the lead. They tell their parents, Mom, I want to go visit. I want to be able to make a difference in the lives of those families, those children. I think that's so amazing that I see that in the youth and even in younger kids that actually take it upon themselves to do something. And I'm amazed to see that. And I encourage so many others to do the same, because your voice matters. And so your involvement matters. So take the lead.
Take the lead. That's absolutely right. Jessica and Dylan, if you want to chime in, you're welcome to. We have plenty of questions coming in that I could turn to as well. And maybe I'll just go forward with another one that's come through. How can gospel values and Catholic social teaching principles shape a different path forward on immigration in the United States? Anyone have some thoughts on that?
I do. I think that Catholic social teachings challenges us, all of us. It really does. It really helps us to look toward respect to life, all life, everybody, and it really brings us together to look for unity, to look for reconciliation. We need that so tremendously today, with how there's much hatred, so much division. We must turn to our teachings that really are rich with guidance and helping us understand our faith and understand how we can live our lives in ways that can bring healing, as Dylan said, can really unite us, and so really challenges, no matter what side of the board you are in, it doesn't matter. We're called to come together and to come up with solutions that really helps everybody and truly defends the dignity of life.
Absolutely. Dylan, you want to chime in, and then Jessica?
Sure. Powerful words from Sister Norma there. I think Pope Francis has, in his recent writings, I'm thinking about, Fratelli Tutti in particular, is really, I think, identified one of the central moral challenges of our time is he's challenging us to think about how we can build, how we can lower the barriers to who's part of our we, right? Who is part of the circle of who we consider we. And I think that's Catholic social teaching for me, that's the heart of it, right? How do we go about building a society that includes more and more, so that it's a greater and wider we? There's something that here in the border people, an expression we have, it's tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other me. That we're linked. There's something linked. And I think young people, to get back to your question about young people and what young people bring to it, I think young people today in our country, throughout the world, are really attuned to this, that we are all linked. And when we erect these barriers, whether it's race or immigration status, that's a real moral challenge there. The young people are really attuned to our fundamental interconnectedness, that we all rise and stand together or fall together as one. that, tú eres mi otro yo, you really my other self. And young people have a real allergy, whether it's in the church or outside of the church, to any of those barriers, those artificial barriers that we erect. So young people, I think, can really be, they can embrace that vocation to be bridge people, bridge builders, who build that ever greater we. And I think that Catholic social teaching, has so much to offer, especially Pope Francis and what he's trying to tell us.
When we look at the gospel values and we try to think about the first family that we should always look to an example for, which is Mary and Joseph and Jesus. And remembering that, I know this probably comes up a lot during, Christmas time and immigration week and everything, but remembering that they had to flee. And the reason that they had that courage to flee to somewhere else in order to protect our Savior was because they were always in communion with the Father and in God's will. And they were always in communion to making sure that they always stayed connected to him, whether it was through prayer and just making sure that Christ was the one leading the way. Christ was the one that was leading their actions. So when we think about Catholic social teaching and connecting them to the gospel values, we have to always remember Christ is still the way to do that, following his example. I know Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta once said that the greatest disease in the West here is not any, disease such as coronavirus or TB or leprosy. It's being unwanted, it's being unloved, and it's being uncared for. And I think Jesus always showed that, that whoever he was calling out for change and for conversion and to follow him, he definitely made them feel that they were wanted, loved, and cared for. So always following his example is part of what that gospel value is and needs to be added more to social teaching.
Thanks for that. That's a great way to wrap that up. I think now we'll turn to the many questions we have coming in from our audience. I'm hopeful we'll get to most of them because they're just wonderful. Our first question is from a Georgetown student, and they're asking what kind of divides exist within the Catholic community regarding immigration policy, and how can faith leaders work to overcome them? Dylan, do you want to respond to that?
I think at our best as Catholics, we provide moral clarity. We focus on the person, we focus on the vulnerable, we focus on the excluded. At our worst, we map and image and mirror the rest of society, and we allow partisan divisions to infect us spiritually. And so you see both, right? You see both in the church. Every day I see heroism, I see people of faith giving of themselves and ministering and providing hospitality and focusing on the vulnerable. But we know that politics can affect how we view questions like immigration and contaminate the discussion, right? I think church, to get to your question about church leaders, I think church leaders have they have to provide moral leadership by offering that moral clarity. I've seen some really awesome church leaders in action who do this really well. I think about the bishop of the diocese here in El Paso, who I've been gifted to see, quote unquote, in action. And what I mean when he's in action, he's spending time with the vulnerable. He's listening. He's making it clear that he stands on the side of the weak and the disadvantaged, and that what it means to minister is to show compassion, is to show mercy. And that's inspiring. I think that's real moral leadership. And so I think the challenge for our leaders in the church today is to figure out how they can do that in their context. Who are the people on the margins in their context, and then lifting up that reality and showing the mercy of God, translating that into what it looks today. And sometimes it takes courage, but that's what leadership is. That's what leadership's about.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Sister Norma, we've had a few questions come in just asking if you can tell us more about the Matamoros camp and your work there and what you've seen, I think especially during the past year and a half with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes. Well, the time that I spent with the families there, it brought me to be part of that community with them, because I was able to walk in, and the moment I was walking into the camp, you would see the little children just run up to me and just "Mana, Mana," and just grab and hug me, and it really draw me into being part of their life and their experience of what was happening to them. And it was so many families, thousands of them initially, and then gradually some of them start moving out to other locations because of safety. But in reality, those that remained, which was very close to almost 1,000 immigrants, they went through so much difficulties, like the weather, the storms, the river rising, bringing snakes, and thousands and thousands of mosquitoes, and the rats that would go enter their camp. And I mean, you name it. It was like, oh my God, what else is there? And then finally we had this temperature that dropped so tremendously in the whole state of Texas. And we all suffered here and we saw the problems with those temperatures dropping and freeze for several days. Well, the camp was worse because there was little tents that froze and you saw icicles all over it. So I got this video from this mother midnight and said, "Madre, mire, mi hijito llora, no lo puedo consolar, sus deditos están congelados y llora de dolor." It was so terrible to hear the little boy just cry unconsolably because his little toes were frozen and they hurt so much. I mean, just to get an idea of how much suffering they endured day after day after day, and in the midst of all of that suffering and problems and trying to figure out how to help them and provide for them something to alleviate the pain and what we're going through, is celebrate life. We had a baptism, we had birthday parties, and it was beautiful to share a meal with them and to share their culture. It was life, and at its worst and at its best, and so it was long. And as Dylan mentioned about this lady that crossed 8 times, well, I would go every day, and this couple says they would try to cross every day and come back, and they say, "No la hicieron, no la hicimos." And we would laugh about it, but it was difficult, it was painful, and it was hard to try to cross. And their spirits were down, but yet at the same time, the next day was maybe tomorrow. Even at Border Patrol agent, "A lo mejor la próxima no me encuentran ni pasan." It was like, at least we can laugh, but at the same time, because otherwise, I know many of the mothers would cry every night, because it was painful to see their family, their children, their kids suffering so much.
Thank you. Ana and Jessica, this next question I think is perfect for you. Do you have any practical suggestions for what parishes and people watching who are part of their parish, what they can and should do to support immigrants? And what advice do you have for parish staff?
Yeah, we keep going back to creating those safe spaces, and those spaces where people can actually educate themselves on the issue. There's a lot of different workshops that can be done to educate people that are immigrants themselves about, the human rights and know your rights, that we need to always advocate for different immigrant communities. But definitely creating a space of solidarity, creating a space that is welcoming, where people feel that they won't necessarily have to fear being open about their status or about their immigrant reality.
I agree with Jessica. I think that we need to create those spaces. We need to create those communications. We need to have those conversations. We need to hear what they're going through, and we need to be touched by those stories and continue to develop the leadership among those parishes to give voice to those stories and to continue to get what these families need, get these families included in policies, included in every aspect in our community so they are visible. We need to create those spaces so they become visible.
So yeah, Jessica, you want to say something else?
Yeah, along with what Anna said, as far as, creating those spaces and those groups where people can dialogue, something I see in parishes a lot that works just in general is small faith communities and small groups where people don't necessarily always feel intimidated, and small prayer groups as well, right? So always praying, no matter whether you don't know what to do or you don't know how to solve the problem, you don't know what else to do for that person in the moment, we can always pray for them. We could always invite them to join in prayer. And that has been a huge success and impact in our small faith communities here that I've seen.
Absolutely. That's prayer is so important. I think Sister Norma and Dylan, we've had a few questions coming through about sort of the darker or the harder sides of immigration, with human trafficking as a reality, and also drug trafficking. And that's a push factor of what causes people to come to the border, but it's also a reality at the border. Would either of you be able to comment on those two realities? Sister Norma?
Yes, definitely. It's something that we must definitely be very eye-open to see the fact that this is happening, that families are victims of trafficking and that they are exposed to so much danger. And we must address that and really go after the traffickers and to keep them safe, the families, and to be watchful for them and protect them. I am constantly, one of the reasons why I'm so involved in Reynosa is because of that, precisely because the fact that the families are so exposed to so much danger and to all these traffickers just to snatch them and to do whatever they want with them and with the children. It happened a lot at the camp in Matamoros. And so we must protect families. We must protect children, little girls. And so it is a very serious thing. And we must address that, but we must not overlook the fact that the victims are the families, and we cannot neglect the fact that they need our care, but at the same time, we must go full force in attacking and destroying traffickers and the trafficking of drugs and people that is happening a lot.
Dylan, you have anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, as Sister Norma said, human trafficking is a real scourge, and just a real offense against human dignity. The reality is that a lot of human trafficking is connected to the inability of people to migrate legally. When we don't have legal options for people to cross the border, when people can't come, for example, right now and claim asylum, who are fleeing violence, who are fleeing persecution, who are fleeing devastating conditions, what you do is you incentivize unsavory actors, criminals, criminal activity. You incentivize people who are going to prey on a vulnerable population that and migrants are that vulnerable population. We have, I've witnessed it on a daily basis sometimes, how traffickers prey on vulnerable migrants here in my community here in Ciudad Juarez, across the way from El Paso. When we create vulnerable communities of people who just have no other way to cross the border, you're going to incentivize bad actors who are going to take advantage of that and exploit it. So that one of the most urgent things that we can do to address human trafficking is to make sure that people have legal pathways. I
think Dylan's video may have frozen a little bit there. So let me just turn to this last question from our audience, and then we'll wrap up here. All of you have rightly lifted up the dignity of immigrants as part of our faith. So what do people who don't see it our way, how do we respond to them? What about others who live in our country but suffer injustice, like racism and lack of opportunity? Are these groups competitors for jobs and dignity, or are they allies? Jessica or Anna, would you like to respond to that?
Could you please ask the question again? It was a little confusing.
Sure, of course. We've talked about the dignity of immigrants as part of our faith in our nation, but what about people who don't see it our way? What about others who live in our country but suffer injustice, racism, and lack of opportunity? Are these groups allies, or are they competitors for jobs?
That's a hard question, but I think we see when we talk about Catholic social teaching and we think about the solidarity, and we understand that there are many other groups that are also suffering, I think we also need to take them into account and not just focus on one specific group, because the pain and the suffering is extending, like you said, discrimination and others, minorities suffering. I don't think there is there is a contest between who gets the resources and who doesn't. I think we need to build bridges between both communities, and we can help each other, and we can become stronger if we work together. Um, I just see that we can be one voice united in having relationships, because those issues at the end of the day are going to affect everyone. When we think about the body of Christ, they are also part of the body. And if they're suffering, we are suffering too. So we need to build those bridges and not see them as an adversary, but as possible allies.
Absolutely. Jessica, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think the question was a little bit not necessarily confusing. It was just more of a sense of why does it have to be one or the other? Competitors versus allies, where when we look at it through the eyes of God and realize that everyone was created by God with the same, dignity, then it shouldn't be one or the other, right? So the other day I was even talking with a friend and whenever there is a difference in issue or, some discrimination or oppression of something, really we need to go back to, well, you're a child of God, I'm a child of God. How do we walk with each other? How do we accompany each other? So
That's a great place to wrap up our conversation. I think I'll just close with this sort of personal reflection, and then I'll turn it over to both of you. About 2 years ago, I discovered a bluegrass band called Che Appalachia, and the 4 members are from Argentina, Mexico, and the United States, and they have terrific music. You can look them up online. But they have this one song called The Dreamer, and it has these lyrics in the final verse of the song. It says, "Now you and I can sing a song and we can build a congregation, but only when we take a stand will we change our broken nation." So my closing question to each of you is, how can each of us listening take a stand to change our broken nation? What's one action we can take? Anna, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I have to say it, organize, join us, speak to people, get your parishes involved, get your voices active, organize, get trained, develop leaders.
Dylan, how about you?
Yeah, folks, folks will always welcome folks down here at the border to volunteer, but you can find the borders in your own community. I really believe that God is calling us, to that vision of Pope Francis, where we build that wider we, and everybody can embrace that vocation to work on the margins. The margins are in your community. It'll give you a deeper hunger for spirituality, a deeper hunger for God. It'll inspire you, and you'll fall in love.
Jessica?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Anna and Dylan just said, especially the part about organize. We need to organize ourselves to educate others, to advocate for others, but also, again, to pray for others. I've been, sitting here looking at Our Lady of Guadalupe behind Sister Norma, and, any time that we organize, we should also be organizing, to come together in prayer and solidarity, because who doesn't gain anything from that? People gain everything from prayer and coming together. So why not start there?
And Sister Norma.
Yes, actually, I really love all your answers. I really, truly believe that how you think is really the answer to move forward. I just wanted to close with the words, that my bishop, Bishop Daniel Flores, has said once, and I always repeat this because it's true, si no caminamos juntos, nunca vamos a llegar. It's like Dylan said, if we will rise together or fall together, but we must do it together, otherwise we will never get there. And so it's about all of us together. And so, like the what you just shared with us, we must be willing to stand up and do something about it so that we can fix this broken nation where we are right now. And so it's through healing, through bringing love into our lives so that we can bring forgiveness and we can bring others together with us to hear each other out and to really find solutions that bring us together and make it right for everybody, and it starts, like Dylan said, in your own community, because you have a lot of people there that need you, and if you want to do more, we'll come on down to the border, and I'm certain that we will make sure we'll find something for you to do. You won't regret it. It will make a big difference in your life and the life of somebody you touched.
Thank you so much, Anna and Dylan and Jessica and Sister Norma. And thanks to all of you for watching and joining us. This is just a reminder that this discussion will be recorded and posted on our website and social media channels for later viewing. And you can also see follow-up resources from the discussion posted on our website. Thanks to all those who helped on the technical end of this dialogue, and a special thanks to my colleagues John Carr and Kim Daniels at the initiative, and Alejandra Aguilera-Titus, Jill Rao, Mar Munoz-Visoso, Paul Jarzembowski, and Todd Scribner from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops for all of their efforts to put this terrific conversation together. Finally, please join me in thanking our panel, Ana Chavarin, Dylan Corbett, Jessica Hernandez, and Sister Norma Pimentel, for their outstanding contribution to this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.